If you're hungry for some ogre news, then get ready, because the Mussy, that's right, the Mawpit, and also the Ogre Gorgers have got rules, and we found out some information about their new army of Renown, which is going to be coming out in the next few weeks in the Dawnbringers Book 3. Dawnbringers Book 3 releases, and there's 4 armies of Renown in there, and there's an ogre one, and that's what we're going to be talking about now. We're going to be looking at the new rules for the Gorgers, which is available in a box. We'll talk about that, and the Mawpit, which is a new piece of terrain that you can use in your normal ogre army anyway. You could also use the Gorgers in a normal ogre army, and also we're going to be talking about what it's going to be like in the Army of Renown, which is also going to come out in that future release. So I hope that makes sense. Dawnbringers Book 3, that's where you get a new way to play your Ogre's army. It's featured around the Gutbusters, but if you do want to do that, you are going to have to pick up this box. Let's talk about the box that we're talking about first. So on pre-order right now is this box, the Hunter and the Hunted, and it features the Mawpit, as you can see it over there, yeah, the Morgina in the top right, and it's got a unit of Gorgers in, or specifically a unit of the Gorger Claw Pack in there. They've also got some humans, which you 100% can sell to some Cities of Sigmar players, which there are loads of. So I feel like this is one of those boxes you can definitely get. So you get the terrain piece, and then you get the unit of Gorgers. Easy. Right, let's talk about what they do first. I think that's going to be the important point. We're going to talk about the Mawpit first, because this is interesting. So normally you would obviously have you already would have your piece of terrain that you can have your cooking pot for ogres. This replaces it if you want to. So you can take the normal the Great Maw Pot that you normally take, or you can take the Mawpit. It's obviously free to take. The important part about the Mawpit is where you can set it up. After territory is determined, you can set up this faction terrain feature wholly outside of enemy territory, and more than 3 inches from all objectives and other terrain features. Now, this means you don't have to only deploy in your territory, which means you've got more options on where to place it. And I've just built one, and it's massive. It's no giggities in the comments, please, but it's 9 inches long and 5 inches wide. So it's long and girthy as a piece. It's important to note. No comments, please. And this is going to be really important because this has several AoE effects, or area of effects, and you're going to be able to measure from every single point of this terrain. And being able to measure from every point does mean that you're going to have much bigger effect area with this, which is super important. So it's massive, and it's very effective. Okay, it's also defensible, and you're able to garrison a butcher, which is a unit inside of that terrain feature, and then they become a head butcher. This also means if that butcher, who's available to use like the blizzard spell or any spell, can measure the range of its spell from anywhere in the footprint of this piece of terrain, so it's got a really large area of like effect, and its threat projection is really big. You can't take this and the pot. So I'm being asked that in the chat. You can't take this and the pot. You can only take this on its either the pot or this. I personally think you're probably going to take this every time. Okay, so what does it do? Got a couple of things. The Throat of Gur is easily one of the worst written rules I've seen in Age of Sigmar for a very long time. Very, very long time. So I'm going to just ad-lib it. I'm not going to read it out to you because you'll go cross-eyed. And as my friend Declan said in the chat earlier, it's really funny to release what is easily one of the most complicated rules in Age of Sigmar to a group of players who very proudly, Destruction players, very proudly will tell you that they can't read. So, you know, that's pretty mean. But what it does is at the end of each charge phase, so it's the end of the charge phase, so it's each player's charge phase, then any unit within 12 inches of the Mawpit, and not wholly within, just within 12 inches of the Mawpit, that isn't in combat on a 3+ takes D3 mortal wounds. Super simple. Yeah? Oh, and also has to be within 12 inches of an enemy unit. So you've got to be within 12 inches of the terrain feature, 12 inches of the enemy unit, and isn't in combat on a 3+ D3 mortal wounds. And that's every unit. And don't forget, like I said, you could place this in the middle of the board, and then that would be all of those units. Now, where it gets really crazy is that it doesn't affect Gutbuster units. So if you were to take loads of Gutbuster units in your army, it's not going to affect you. And if you garrisoned it, that range is extended from 12 inches to 18 inches, which is a huge board-wide effect. so that you can place units here and there, and your opponent can start taking tons of mortal wounds. There's obviously a way to try and stop it, but you've got to there's a way to shut it down, and that's your army is in combat. And the ogre players are going to be really happy about that because they love being in combat. So this is really good, and it's loads of AoE mortal wounds, and it's the end of every charge phase. So it's very possible that the enemy could lose a couple of support characters on turn 1 from what we're calling wallet tech. So you just buy something, and this isn't like some clever, ingenious mechanical device. You're just buying a thing, putting it down, and you're doing AoE mortal wounds. Pretty rough. Now, the head butcher's also got an ability. So the guy that's garrisoned inside of it, if this terrain feature has a head butcher in your hero phase, you can say that an offering will be made to the Mawpit, and if you do so, you pick an enemy unit within 18 inches of this terrain feature and roll a dice. If that roll is more than twice the enemy unit's wounds characteristic, so if they've got a wounds characteristic of 1 and you roll a 2, then you slay an enemy model. But if they've got a wounds characteristic of 1 and you roll like a 4 or 5, then that's triple the amount, and then you slay 3 models from that unit. So if it's a 2 wound unit, then you'll need to roll a 6 and you can kill 3 enemy models, which is quite interesting. So that's okay. You're going to just be able to keep sniping like a single model out here or there. But in conjunction with all the other AoE damage, there's a lot going on. And then finally, you've got It Fights Back. And this is kind of the important thing. The thing you're asking yourself is, okay, Rob, that Mawpit's going to do a lot of damage to my army. I'm going to run across and I'm going to stomp on it, right? That's what I'm going to do. So you're going to use the Monstrous Rampage, Smash to Rubble. Number 1, you need to make sure you have a monster in your army. And I think maybe going forward, most of us are going to need to get a monster in our army. Otherwise, this Mawpit is going to do an insane amount of damage to our armies, which is going to be pretty rough. If you fail to do the monstrous action Smash to Rubble, which is where you make it so it doesn't work, then on a 1 or 2, your monster is going to take 3d6 mortal wounds, which averages out at 11 mortal wounds. So that's going to be pretty rough. And I know ogre players are going to be out there being like, don't stamp on my mussy, good sir, and therefore you get bitten. But there we go. So the only way to stop this from doing loads of damage to your army is to go and stomp it, and if you fail it, you're going to take a ton of damage. This obviously is going to really impact how good Gutbusters are in the meta, and I think this is definitely more effective than the Mawpit. So for just ogre players are in a great position because they're like, cool, I've got a new awesome thing to add to my army, which is going to make my army more effective. It's just unfortunately that awesome thing is terrain and not miniatures, which is kind of a weird thing to be excited about, I think. But there we go. Okay, so that's the Mawpit. Okay, and you need to ask yourself right now, do you prefer the Mawpot or the Mawpit? And then also ask yourself who your favourite Mawpit is. Is it Kermit or is it Fozzie Bear? Okay, all right. So we're going to go look at the Army of Renown, because the Army of Renown keys in with how the Mawpit works. Okay, this is important. So at the start of each battle round, a 2d6 rolls. So, sorry, this is the Army of Renown. So the Army of Renown is going to feature all of the Gutbuster keyword units. That's what it's going to feature. The new Gorgers and the Gutbuster keyword units. So if you're already a Stonehorn player, or if you like any of that stuff, none of that is really going to affect you. You're not going to be able to use those in this. It's going to be Gutbuster keyword mainly. Okay, that's what the Army of Renown is going to be made of. Okay. You're going to take the Mawpit in that as well, and then you get a special rule for the Mawpit, which is that you roll a dice at the beginning of each battle. Sorry, 2 dice at the beginning of each battle round, and then you add +1 if it's garrisoned, if the Mawpit is garrisoned by Butcher, and you also add +1 for each model that it's eaten with the Head Butcher ability. Remember earlier on where we picked an enemy unit within 18 inches and we rolled a dice. If we killed any models, we'll add that to the total, which is cool. So you're already getting +1 in round 1, and the average on 2d6 is 7. So you should always be getting like a 6 to 8 result. And this is going to apply at the beginning of each battle round. So what do you get? On a 2 to 3, nothing happens. Oh, and who does it affect? It affects units that are not wholly within. It's board wide. It affects every unit on the board that are not wholly within 1 inch of a terrain feature, which is very, very hard to do. Sylvaneth units, it's a little bit easier because they can obviously be inside their trees, but it's going to affect everyone else. Being wholly within 1 inch of a terrain feature is very hard to be because it's wholly within. That's the whole base of the whole unit. It's pretty tough to do. All units that can fly. It's not going to affect units that can fly. Everyone else in no man's land, it's going to affect them. but it isn't going to affect units from the Army of Renown. So roving more units, it's not going to affect your Army of Renown. And don't forget, this whole thing only works in an Army of Renown. The thing we talked about before is just general ogre rules. This is an additional rule for the Army of Renown. So, if you roll 2d6, you get no effect on subdued. On a 4 to 5, you get peckish. Subtract 1 from the bravery for characteristics for units that are vulnerable to Mawpits, which you don't care about that. Rumbling is good. Roll a dice for each unit that is vulnerable to Mawpits. On a 5+, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. So a little bit more AoE damage, but it's only 1 mortal wound, so you don't really care. 9 to 11, it becomes insane. Famished, units that are vulnerable to the Mawpits, that do not have the hero keyword, cannot issue commands. That's insane. So units that are vulnerable to Mawpits that do not have the hero keyword. So this means huge swaths of units are not going to be able to issue commands like no all-out defense, no all-out attack, no inspiring presence. That's very good. That's arguably better than the final result, which is Ravenous. Roll a dice for each unit that is vulnerable to Mawpits. On a 4+, they suffer D3 mortal wounds. The Famished is actually probably more effective, like in what it's going to do in games. So it's just crazy. If you're an ogre player, this is very good. You're going to be very excited about that. Don't forget that doesn't affect roving more units. And finally, there's a spell lore for butchers that are in the roving more Army of Renown. And they've shown us one. One is more meat. And it's cast on a 6, and it's a range of 18 inches, and you pick a terrain feature, and for the rest of the battle, that terrain feature doesn't even count to protect you from the Mawpit. So that makes you vulnerable to Mawpits. So it's at this point, let's just take a moment to remember that the Mawpit is just a new thing that you can buy and put into an ogre army, and it's got some crazy rules. And if you want, when the Dawnbringers book comes out, you're going to be able to run an Army of Renown where that Mawpit is even stronger, which is interesting. That's where we're at. And I'd love to know what you all tell me, or I'd love you all to tell me right now what you think about that. Okay? Some big wallet tech in there. There's very big wallet tech. And finally, if you do end up buying the Mawpit, you are going to get a unit of Gorgers in that box as well. And those Gorgers are great miniatures. They're on 50mm basis. And it's a unit of 5, and they're 220 points. And we've also got the rules for those as well. So 220 points. And on first viewing, they're definitely going to feel a little bit underwhelming. But I actually think that these are very good. In the Armies of Renown, they might be even better. But in a general ogre army, I think they're good. Because currently, Gluttons are 220 points. So you're kind of like comparing them, apples for oranges, and I think they stand up against Gluttons quite nicely. So there's 5 wounds each, so there's 5 models, so that means there's going to be 25 wounds in this unit, but they only have a 6+ save, so they're very fragile, and anything that hits them, they're going to die, but quite nicely, they have a bravery of 8, so even if you lose 2, you're still not going to fail a battle shock test, which is quite nice. We quite like that. And if they're in combat, because they're an ogre, and they have the Gutbuster keyword, then you're going to be adding pluses to your bravery, so you're in a good position there. But they are very fragile, and they're going to die really, really easily. They're movement 6, but obviously, if they're hungry in an ogre army, they're going to go up to movement 8, so they can be really fast. They're also going to do impact hits, and they come as a unit of 5, which is nice as well, like quite a lot of models. Okay, they've got 2-inch range on their weapons. They've got 3 attacks each, and it's 3s and 3s, rend 1, damage 2, which again is really nice. 2s and 3s. Like the rend 1 is a little bit sad, but obviously you could try and cast Hoarfrost on them. But they're a legit combat unit, and they're as good as they're as good as Gluttons in the army. But they've got some bonuses. Number 1, if you want, you could put them in Deep Strike with ambushing hunters. If you want, so put them in Deep Strike, and obviously you've got Deep Strike 9 away. And one model in the unit has got one model in the unit is a Cave Howler, and the Cave Howler's got a special rule, which is Agonizing Roar. You roll a dice for each enemy unit that receives a command within 12 inches of a friendly Cave Howler. On a 5+, that command is not received, but the command point is still spent, and the command point is lost. So that's actually really good. Like, really, really good. You know, Gluttons don't really bring any utility to your army, and the Agonizing Roar from the Cave Howler in this unit is actually very, very good. Like, very good. You know, shutting down all of the enemy's command abilities is super strong, especially if you double that up with the Mawpit, so that, like, you know, some units just can't issue commands, and when your heroes do it on a 5+, it's just not going to be able to be cast. I think that's really powerful. It's good against Ossiarch Bone Reapers, has been pointed out in the chat. because, you know, you're going to shut down their ability to do loads of command abilities, which is fun. But lots of armies do lots of command abilities. Even things like, you know, you're going to charge your ogres in, and they're about to do an Unleash Hell. You could just be like, cool, that's not going to happen, and I'm going to shut down on 5+. So they're not broken, and they're not terrible, but they definitely bring some utility to an army that has very little utility, which is great. They're also good models. They're super fun. I built some the other day. They're very cool to build. And they'll do some okay damage. So that's it for the ogre players. I'm interested what everyone thinks about this particular kind of loadout, especially the terrain feature. I got to say, I don't love terrain features defining armies. I feel like we're in this for miniature, you know, soldiers and, you know, monsters and stuff. And while terrain is cool, I love terrain, I feel like it having rules that make it so that your army's better because of the rules, I'm not a huge fan of that. I think that's the thing I would like to not see happen in Age of Sigmar. I feel like that's over the top, you know, and I feel I would be quite disappointed if this, you know, giant mussy starts eating up all my characters. It's very narrative though, like thematically it works. Like they haven't done a bad job of like expressing the idea of there being a Mawpit on the ground eating people up. It feels like something that should be in like a narrative scenario versus something that's like in an actual game. Like losing my characters just because you've like eaten my boys up feels lame in my opinion. But there we go. I'd love to know what everyone thinks. Let me know in the comments below. Hope you enjoyed the video. Obviously subscribe to my Patreon, all those other things.